Warning: Agents of the Inquisition beware. This document contains a depiction of what might be the vilest of all traitor legions. If your heart is not strong enough to withstand its horrors, you might be soul scarred and marked for termination by your superiors. Only consult this dismal text if your faith in the Emperor is strong and your soul pure in his eyes. You have been warned. Index Astartes, Raven Guard, Pure Bloods and Abominations. No legion has fallen further from the light than the Raven Guard. They have turned their souls over to the foulest powers that dwell in the warp, embracing horrors that even the other demented followers of the Dark Gods beware. By corrupting their own bloodline, the sons of the Raven Lord have gained great power, their ranks swelled beyond those of any other traitor or loyal legion. But this profusion of transhuman flesh has come at a terrible cost, one that was no less terrible for all it was long in coming. For Corax's gene line has become a legion of horrors from mankind's darkest nightmares, rendered into twisted flesh and demented minds haunted by the abominable entities that now own their souls. Now, the few remaining pure-blooded warriors of the dreaded 19th lord over their mutated brethren, while their demon Primarch dwells in his shadow-shrouded domain, brooding over old, festering hatreds, and drinking in the agonized screams of his ancient tormentors. Predator or slave, the Raven Guards hold true to the command of their distant father, to make others suffer, or to suffer yourself. Origins. From the depths of cruelty. Knowledge is power, and some knowledge is too dangerous to be allowed to spread. These truths are the foundation of the Inquisition, an organization dedicated to keeping the masses of mankind in the dark about the many and horrible threats that stalk the stars. But even among the Holy Ordos, the truth of the 19th Legion is kept hidden behind layers of secrecy. For to know too much about the legacy of Corvus Corax is to risk madness and damnation. To most members of the Imperium with the credentials to know about the existence of the traitor legions, the Raven Guard are merely a horde of cloned abominations, vile parodies of the Emperor's design on the same level as the Black Legion created by Fabius Bile. The Inquisition is content to let their misconceptions stand, for the truth is far, far more terrible. Any telling of the story of the Raven Guard must begin with the thrice-damned Primarch, Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord. While none of the Primarchs had an easy infancy, the early life of the 19th Primarch stands out as one of darkest torment. The forge world of Calavar in the Segmentum Tempestus was home to a prosperous but oppressive civilization, where a handful of technological circles, known as the Forge Guilds, ruled over the rest of the population with an adamantium fist. The people of both Calavar and its moon, Lycius, were nothing more than slaves to the techno-lords, toiling in the polluted environment to reach impossible quotas. These working conditions caused a plague of mutations in the workers, something the tech priests cared little about, until it began to affect productivity. They searched for a way to make their slaves more resilient to the cancers and flesh changes, working for decades without any true result, until the work of a far greater scientist fell into their hands. The child who would one day become Corvus Corax arrived on Calavar in a rain of fire, having been stolen from the Emperor by the Dark Gods like the rest of his brothers. His life pod, apparently damaged by its brutal journey through the warp, crashed on the planet's surface. Investigation teams were on the site in minutes, and when they found the infant inside the remnants of the pod, miraculously uninjured by his catastrophic arrival, they immediately reported to their masters. The processed paste and recycled water they gave to the child, the blanket with which they covered him, those were the only kindness he would ever know on the Forge World. The infant was confined and studied, blood samples taken to make sure this off-worlder did not carry within him some deadly infection. What the analysis revealed, however, changed everything. This boy, for all that he looked like a 5-year-old human male, was much more. His DNA was unlike anything the tech priest had ever seen, a model of mankind's perfection rendered into flesh by the artifice of some distant, divine gene-smith. The lifepod had been exposed to the raw madness of the warp, whose energies can twist flesh in mere moments. Yet the child inside had been spared from mutations. This convinced the masters of the planet that the secret of the genetic purity they had been searching for was hidden within the body of the strange child. The tech lords of Kalavar did not know the name of their young captive, nor did they care to give him one. Instead, they called him by the number written on the lifepod that had brought him to the world, the 19th. And they were as callous and cruel to him as could be expected from scientists using numbers to name a child. The boy was the only thing he had ever seen that was not purely utilitarian, and it fascinated him. He had been brought by the only person he had ever seen who had flesh like him, instead of metal for a face, though his skin was rosier than his own. He was the only one who touched him without hurting him, the one who bandaged his wounds when he was dragged off the table and back into his room. The book told the story of a small creature with feathered wings, as black as his own hair. The kind man had told him that it was called a raven, and that it could fly wherever it wanted, whenever it chose so. He loved the book. It made him wonder if one day he too would be able to fly beyond the walls of his room, beyond the blanket corridors and the table. An alarm sounded, and the man smiled warmly at the child before stroking his head in goodbye and going back out, into the world beyond the confines of his room. As the man left and the doors closed behind him, the child looked at the glass panel up high. There were dark shapes there, watching, always watching, but this time there was something different in how they moved and how they stood. He knew, somehow, that the shapes were angry, and he knew with utter certainty that he would never see the good doctor again. The early life of the captive was spent in a laboratory designed to study and replicate his body's resilience and resistance to physical corruption. He was exposed to doses of radiation that would have killed a human in seconds, drowned in concentrated chemicals, injected with man-made viruses designed to rewrite the genetic code. For years, the young Primarch knew nothing but cruelty and dispassionate experiments and the distant, shrouded knowledge that this was not as things were supposed to be, that there was a life beyond the confines of the sterile halls and sharp knives. Because of the constant blood samples and the poor sustenance he was given, he grew into a gaunt creature, skin held tight on his bones. Because he never saw the light of the sun, his skin became pale. As he reached what passes for adulthood among Primarchs, the prisoner was still taller and stronger than any mortal man, but his body bore the marks of a lifelong abuse. Despite this, he attempted to escape many times. Even in his diminished state, the young Primarch broke from his restraints, time and again, and carved a path through the servants of his cruel gaolers. Outnumbered in the middle of enemy territory, he learned how to hide and strike from the shadows, developing a preternatural ability for strength. Some tales indicate he could make himself impossible to notice, not through actual invisibility, but by making his presence go unrecorded in the midst of his watchers. In every attempt, he would be caught and dragged back to his cell, where even worse experiments awaited him as a punishment. Yet every time he would also get closer to the outside world and the freedom he carved with every fiber of his being. He also learned patience and planning, devoting entire escapades to not seeking to flee the complex, but to learn more about his surroundings and the nature of the experiments that were performed on him. By plundering data stores, interrogating prisoners, and, on at least one occasion, devouring the brain of one of the artificers who had tortured him, that's funny, the young Primarch learned much of the lore that he would later put to terrible use. It is believed that he did not manage to get out of the facility one time, but was then... No, wait. It is believed that he did manage to get out of the facility one time, but was then left trapped on the planet, at the heart of his enemy's stronghold, bleeding and starving, and was quickly captured again. He was bleeding. But the pain was something he was all too familiar with, and he ignored it as he pushed forward. He was close now, so close. The plans of the building that he had learned 3 attempts ago from a servant of his captors shone in his mind, guiding his steps towards the nearest exit. This time he wouldn't be caught again and dragged back to his cell. This time he would be free. The door appeared in his vision as he took a corner, clinging to the ceiling rather than walking the floor. It was guarded by 2 huge mechanical constructs armed with a plethora of weaponry and covered in armor. The latest design of Keeper Hunters designed by the masters of this place. It took him 14 seconds to dispatch them, and then, at last, he thought he was through the door. Something warm felt on his face, light coming down from above. Blinded by his first ever sight of sunlight, he looked up and saw the cloud-filled sky of Klavar. It was full of pollution, and the very air stank of chemicals and toxic compounds. Yet it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Then he lowered his gaze and saw dozens of the constructs gathered around the door, weapons aimed straight at him, with no cover in sight. He realized then that he had walked right into a trap, and that all his efforts had been for naught. He screamed in rage and denial and charged at the creatures, thinking that maybe, just maybe, he could force them to kill him and end this nightmare once and for all. But he had no such luck, and he woke up later, strapped on the table once more, with fanged and twirling devices buzzing above his exposed torso. Regardless of the security cost involved in keeping a Primarch captive, the Tech Lords learned much from their research on the 19th. They created a serum from his blood that could prevent mutation, even in the menials working in the deepest pits of chemical waste, and use it to increase the workload of Klavar's population once more. However, the serum also had another effect, slowly driving those receiving it mad with visions of being imprisoned and tortured by their overlords. While the exact nature of the Primarch is now long lost to the Imperium, there have been stories of legionnaires having visions of their Genesire's life for thousands of years. It is, therefore, likely that through some quirk of the Primarch's biology, that the memories of Klavar's captives were spread to the Tech Lord's servants. After several rebellions from the maddened servants, the Tech Lords stopped producing the serum and resumed their research. The young Primarch went from being little more than a chained blood bag to a research subject once again. And after the initial success of the serum, his tormentors were even more determined to find a way to enhance their slaves without the same side effects. It was during the second phase of research that, more than a century after the beginning of the Great Crusade, that the Imperium reached Klavar. The Emperor, accompanied by Horus Lupercal, arrived in the system with a massive fleet. The Master of Mankind has sensed the presence of his son on the planet, yet when Imperial intelligence analyzed the system's transmissions, it soon became clear that, unlike the other instances of a Primarch being found, there was no transhuman demigod leading the population. The Tech Lords of Klavar immediately recognized that they could not hope to match the raw power of the fleet that had entered their realm. But when the Emperor contacted them, and demanded that they release his son to him, their cunning and cruel minds saw an opportunity. A deal was struck between the Emperor and the Tech Lords. In return for Corvus Corax, the name the Emperor had always intended for his 19th son, being handed over to the fleet, the planet would be welcomed the Imperium while keeping much of its independence, including the Tech Lords remaining in power. A crimson haze of pain clogged his senses. Time flowed strangely, with days passing in the blink of an eye, while every second under a knife lasted an eternity. Ever since they had stopped simply using him as a source of blood and brought him back to the table, he had not managed to escape a single time. There was always too much pain, too many different drugs running through his bloodstream to even make an attempt. Nightmarish visions haunted him as he went in and out of delirium. He saw horrible things in these feverish dreams. Immense pits full of glowing liquid, assembly lines that stretched on seemingly forever, all to the tune of screamed orders and fresh agonies. Shapes moved at the edge of his perceptions. Most of them he knew all too well, but one of them was different from anything he had ever seen, yet strangely familiar. Unlike the silhouettes of shadows that had tormented him for so long, this one radiated golden light that both reminded him of his single, fleeting touch of sunlight and made his wounds ache. Through the pain and the drugs, he heard words being exchanged. "Here it is. Take it with you, as we agreed." The golden shape drew nearer, towering over him, looking down as if it was judging his worth. When it spoke, the words were even more distant and vague than those of the captive's tormentors. "The 19th. I have been looking for it for a long time. It has been damaged somewhat. We were not aware of its importance to your design. I trust this is acceptable." "Yes. It is still in a state where it can fulfill its purpose." A spark of hatred burst within his heart as he heard the cold, uncaring pronouncement, and he swore that one day this bearer of false light would pay for talking about him like that, just like his tormentors would. The Great Crusade, bitterness, and stolen secrets. Despite all his efforts, Horus Lupercal knew that his wrath was radiating from him as he stood in his father's chambers aboard the Bucephalus. He had just returned from the Apothecarion, where his little brother had laid in the care of dozens of the best medici in the entire galaxy. He had seen the fresh wounds and the old scars on the emaciated body of his kin. For the first time, he had seen one of his brothers vulnerable, and felt the same feeling he had seen shining in the eyes of some gangers on Catonia when their bloodkin had been harmed. He burned with a desire to inflict retribution upon those responsible. And now his father was denying this to him. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you agree to their terms?" "They threaten your brother's life," answered the golden-clad warlord, "even if they never had the courage to actually say it out loud. If I had sent your wolves, they would have killed him." "They don't have him now," argued Horus. "I gave my word." The first Primarch couldn't help but scoff at that. He knew very well what the Emperor's word meant when it was given to tyrants and monsters. He had seen the ruins of Terran cities whose masters had thought they could bargain with the master of mankind. "They are trying to force you into an accord that benefits them, even without what they did to Korax. Don't try to tell me you wouldn't." "Lycaeus is full of armed nukes aimed at the planet below," said the Emperor, cutting off his son. That made Horus go silent, and the Emperor continued. "The Technolords were very clear that if I attempted anything against them, they would launch them just to deny Kavar to me. There is no one here with the skills to deactivate the missiles without them noticing and activating them. Perhaps if some of Malkador's agents were here, but they are not. Would you risk this world burning just to give your brother justice?" "Yes," admitted Horus. He knew it wasn't the right answer. That, as a Primarch, he was supposed to always consider the bigger picture, but he always knew that his father would see through any lie. "I would do it. I will do all in my power to make sure that does not happen. But I would take the risk. These creatures do not deserve to live, let alone rule a planet part of the Imperium, be it just in name." But the Emperor didn't reprimand him for his short-sightedness. Instead, for a moment, the mask of regal power and control Horus's father wore at almost all times slipped, revealing the old, weary man behind. The old man, the one Horus truly regarded as his father, smiled sadly. It was the smile of someone who had made too many compromises and knew it, yet had no choice but to go on. For the consequences of turning back were unacceptable. The smile of a man who had to make deals with monsters that he wanted nothing more than destroy with all his power. The smile of a man who was scared that in the end, when he finally accomplished his goals, there would be nothing left of him. Good. Cling to your love for your brothers, Horus, said the master of mankind in a voice much more befitting his true age. It is what makes you human, despite everything. It took several months for Corax to recover from his treatment at the hands of the Technolords, and even then the Primarch would bear the marks of his tormented youth his entire life. Once his recovery was complete, Corax needed time to learn all that he would need to know in order to lead the 19th Legion. The young Primarch appeared to be grateful to the Emperor for saving him from the clutches of the Technolords, and he promised to not disappoint. He plunged into learning with the hunger only possible in one who had been denied it for so long. Those same teachers who had trained Horus Lupercal in the art of war were brought back aboard the Bucephalus to teach Corax, and the first Primarch himself schooled his little brother in the finest points of modern warfare. During that time, the Emperor ensured that none knew the exact circumstances of their Primarch's discovery, maintaining a veil of secrecy through demanding of vows of silence from all those involved with his healing and training. The reason for this are unknown. Some believe that the Emperor was shamed that one of his sons had failed to conquer his homeworld, while the others think that the Master of Mankind wanted to free Corax from his past so that he could take his rightful place in the Imperium. Whatever the reason, Corax was kept hidden from the rest of the Imperium until he was ready to take command of the Legion that had been created from his gene seed. The 19th Legion's first warriors were taken from the savage Scythic tribes of what was once in Terra's distant past called Asia. Their first task was to ensure that their own people remained compliant with imperial rule, which they did with ruthless efficiency, seemingly uncaring that those were the bloodkin they were fighting. The Emperor considered this a success, though maybe he should have seen it as a sign of what was to come. In the Wars of Unification, they were employed as skilled infiltrators. An imperial envoy would come to the land of a techno-barbarian warlord and make a simple offer: bend the knee to the Emperor or die. When the warlord refused, and most did, for all of them were as proud as they were insane, a warrior of the 19th Legion would suddenly appear from the shadows, his bolter aimed right at the head of the tyrant. The emissary would then repeat the offer, which generally got a different answer. Should the techno-barbarian still cling to his pride, often backed up by illicit technology that could protect him against the Astartes killer, then the 19th Legion would cripple his entire organization, striking at officers and seconding commands at the same time. The panicked leaderless troops would then offer little resistance to the legionnaires. The same tactics served the Legion well during the Great Crusade and contributed to their image as an instrument of the Emperor's wrath, devoid of compassion. Without a Primarch to lead them, the warriors of the 19th were scattered in small groups, using their skills with ruthless efficiency. Many human worlds resisting compliance submitted after these somber legionnaires struck down their leaders in plain view of their people. Xenos overlords ruling over human populations were exterminated without mercy, nor heed for civilian casualties, such as during the scouring of the moon of Lycintia. In that particular battle, the human Stellars were completely wiped out, and the Legion also suffered terrible losses. Even the Astartes who survived the encounter with the strange alien warlords were marked by what they had experienced, carrying with them a darkness that would never leave them. Such was the Legion Corvus Corax was given command of when he had completed his training, shrouded in the dark rumors and a darker past, wounded by many battles but unbroken. We do not know why Corax chose to give his legion the name of Raven Guard. Before being reunited with his Primarch, warriors of the 19th Legion were called by various titles. the Pale Nomads, the Duskclads, among others. Many have pointed to the ancient myths attached to the Terran bird, making it as a herald of fate, bringing doom and death upon those it visits. This image aligns with the method then employed by the Legion, as well as with what it would eventually become. In later years, ravens across the Imperium were all but driven to extinction, spread only because most Imperial citizens cannot distinguish between them and crows. And the later are associated with Jagos Civetarian, the Prince of Crows of the 8th Legion, therefore considered sacred by many branches of the Imperial Creed. Certainly, despite the paranoia of many Imperial officers about these black-feathered avians, the Raven Guard has displayed no particular link to them. When Koras took command of his sons, their numbers weren't as high as most of the other legions. Losses taken because of their particular way of waging war, combined with the fact that a legion without a Primarch suffered from more difficulties in recruitment, had ensured that they were less than 10,000 Raven Guards. While still far more than the 1,000 sons or the Emperor's children at the time of their reunion with their Primarch, it was still a worrying situation, and one Korax was determined to solve. The Raven Lord, as his sons called him, had learned much about his own nature from the inhuman experiments of the Clavarian Technoloords. He stalked from shadow to shadow, passing right before the Golden Guardians without any of them noticing him. Gene-locked vaults opened with a touch of his hand, for he was close enough to his maker that even the advanced devices could not detect the difference. The words engraved in the walls, crafted to hold at bay every manner of creature from the Sea of Souls, did not hinder him the slightest. They did not appear to notice his presence. Korak stood in the laboratory of the creature that called itself his father, aboard the Bucephalus. Right now, the so-called Emperor was busy with yet another conquest, along with that poor fool Horus. Thinking about his brother made Korak's skin crawl. Would he have been the same had he been found by the Emperor as a child? Nothing more than a willing puppet, an extension of their father's will? But Horus loved him. He was sure of it. Lupercal might be blind to the deceit of the Emperor, but he truly loved Korax, and for that, he swore that one day he would free Horus from his slavery. One way or the other. Perhaps he would find such a way here. The walls were covered in schematics, arcane formulas that Korax barely understood, but memorized nonetheless. Great cogitators whirled endlessly, data scaling down their screens. Organs floated in preservation tanks. Korax moved towards one of the cogitators, and using the lessons he had learned during his attempted escapes, began to force his way into its secrets. The genetic lore that had gone into his creation was interesting, but it was not why he had come here. Risking everything should he be caught. He saw the knowledge both the Emperor and Horus denied him when he had asked. He sought what had become of the 2nd and 11th Primarchs. The 19th Legion had no homeworld, a fact that was the source of some mockery among the other legions, who derided Korax as the only Primarch to fail to conquer the world on which he had been sent. Even Rogue Aldorn, who had been forced to burn Inwith to deny it to the Orcs, thought himself superior to Korax, for not only had he conquered Inwith, he also united the entire cluster behind his leadership. This lack of territory meant that the Raven Guard had no ready pool of recruits to pick from, and so Korax found another way. Cloning. The Ravenlord secured locations across the breadth and width of the Imperium, isolated places of little interest to the Great Crusade, and there he built laboratories in which new Astartes would be created. They would not be children taken from the planets and implanted with his gene seed. Instead, they would be cloned from a combination of the DNA of the existing legionaries. These warriors had already proven that their genetics were compatible with the 19 Legion's gene seed, and therefore they were the best source of material for the next generation. The growth of these clone soldiers was accelerated through hormonal stimulants, their minds forged through implemented memories and hypno-training, and their flesh merged with the blood of Korax from the very first moment of existence. When they awoke from a few months of incubation, they were a little different from more conventional Astartes, lacking in personality and individuality perhaps, but that was hardly noticeable in the eyes of normal humans. While other legions regarded this practice with horror, there were many tech priests and imperial officers who believed that the Raven Guard were actually pioneers, and that in time all legions would adopt their methods. To many civilians, all Astartes looked the same. It made sense to them to stop tithing children from compliant populations and use science instead. But there were reasons the Emperor had not used cloning when creating the Space Marines legions. The secrets of replication, developed during the Dark Age of technology, had never been designed for the transhuman physiology of the Astartes, and even Korak's genius and ill-gotten knowledge weren't enough to surmount the difficulty. The Ravenlord was cautious to conceal the true cost of his cloning operations. Yet tales began to circulate nonetheless among the other legions, and beyond, whispers of the horrific failures the process created with distressing regularity. There are rumors of Imperial agents being sent to investigate and never returning, seeming to vanish completely. No actual evidence of wrongdoing was ever uncovered, however, and so the Raven Guard was left to its own devices. The thing on the table looked nothing like the transhuman warriors its gene seed had come from. It was little more than a blob of pale skin, from which emerged a dozen atrophied limbs that twitched pitifully in the air, as well as a singular head that alone seemed human, only with nothing in its eye sockets. Without proper lungs, the thing could not scream. All it could do was wail softly as its perfectly transhuman brain struggled in vain to control its body. With a disappointed sigh, Korax broke the creature's neck, ending its pitiful mewling. He had learned all he could from it through the Alpex scans and blood samples. Already his mind was envisioning the modifications to the process that would solve this particular set of defects he had suffered from, without interfering with the corrections made in previous iterations. No matter how many more it took, he would find a way to solve all the obstacles that stood in the path of this project. Maybe the reason why he kept failing lied in the taint left over from his warrior's brutal war against the Lycentian Xenos. Could the process be thrown off by the minute difference this has created in his son's DNA? He would find out. No matter how many twisted corpses it required, he would prove himself a great genesmith than the so-called, or he would prove himself a greater genesmith than the so-called master of mankind. This leniency was encouraged by the efficiency of the 19th Legion on the Great Crusade. With their numbers bolstered, the sons of Korax were able to conquer entire swaths of the galaxy. Neither the deluded human kingdoms who refused compliance, nor the alien empires that plagued the stars could stand against the combination of the cloned Astartes' ruthless advance and the stealth of the other warriors. At the same time, as the first cloned Astartes came to the battlefield, many commanders of the Raven Guard continued to recruit warriors in the traditional way, taking in children from the conquered worlds and remaking them in their Primarch's image. These Astartes, named Purebloods, were trained in the Legion's ancient methods of war, becoming heirs of the Cyric fighters' infiltrating abilities. Then, the divide between the clones and the Purebloods grew, with the latter being given almost every position of influence in the Legion, while the former remained mere cannon fodder, created to die at the command of their betters. The question of the replica. To the historians consulting these archives, familiar with the modern Astartes warriors and their pride, it might appear strange that the cloned Astartes would accept such treatment without protesting. Surely no warrior would willingly allow such insult to be heaped upon his honor. The answer to that lies in the nature of the cloning process, unearthed from the Dark Age of technology, and that Korax adapted to his needs. Whether by design or accident, the technomasters of yore never managed to truly master a way to mass-produce human, for lack of a better term, a true soul. Individual, unique creations are possible. Some eccentric tech priests resort to this in order to have children of their own blood. But as soon as the same genetic code is spread among several individuals, there appears to be a thinning of the spiritual essence, as it had been shared between all the clones. The ecclesiarchy decries cloning as abomination against the God Emperor, pointing to the Raven Guard itself, for example. But the Adeptus Mechanicus still makes use of the technology to this day. Even with tens of millions of criminals being sentenced to servitude every year, there are not enough natural human bodies to meet the Imperium's needs for servitors, and so most of the biological components are vat-grown. Besides the spiritual weakness, the cloned Astartes were also more vulnerable to the gene code instinct of all space marines: obedience to their Primarch. So strong is that instinct that it is believed to have been the main reason why so many sane warriors continue to follow their Primarchs in the traitor legions, and Corax amplified the trait even further in the clones. Adherence to the hierarchy, a trait necessary for any legion to function, was taken to extreme the replica marines, to the point that most of them were unable to question any order given to them by their appointed superior. Little more than machines of transhuman flesh clad in ceramite, they are known to have been an unnerving presence to the Psychers, who could sense only the thinnest spark of soul fire within them. With such weak will, it is not surprising that the clones failed to ever rise against the ties of blood that bound them to Corax. In fact, it is believed by many in the Ordos that this blood bond also spreads to all other creations of the 19th Legion, binding them all to the will of the Raven Lord. Corax was a cunning leader, if one suffering from bouts of paranoia that led him to making plans within plans and taking precautions against the most unlikely of possibilities. Likely an inheritance of his past on Clavar. He was also willing to use diplomacy with the human worlds his legions discovered, although rarely so with those ruled over by technocracies. In fact, the relationship between the 19th Legion and the Mechanicus was exceptionally strained. The Raven Lord distrusted the Martian Empire immensely, more than once advocating for the suppression of the machine cult and the forced integration of the tech priest domain into the Imperium. The distrust of Corax for the Mechanicus meant that the Legion was fiercely self-reliant. Several of the worlds it had brought into compliance peacefully had entered pacts of protection with the Legion, providing them weapons, ammunition, and heavy armor in return. That the tech priests were denied access to these worlds nearly sparked an early civil war between the Lords of Mars and the Raven Guard, only stopped by the diplomatic efforts of Malcador and other Imperial agents. With such baggage attached to his legion, it is not surprising that Corax's reputation among his brethren was spotty at best. His relationship with Horus was tumultuous. While Lupercal felt a natural instinct to protect and aid his younger brother, Corax was jealous of Horus's comparatively easier life. The two of them would often violently argue, only to reconcile later, or at least that was how it seemed. Looking back now, it is clear that Corax planned his rebellion for a long time before Guilliman ever fell to chaos. Every Primarch had a secret. Fallback bases of operations in case their forces were victims of some disaster, spy rings across the Imperium, networks of allies, occasional deals with the mysterious Eldar, and so on. But Corax was willing to kill to make sure that the true extent of his genetic experiments was not revealed. It is possible that part of his motivation was to ensure that somehow the pain he had endured in his youth would not be for nothing, no matter how many others had suffered for it. Just what he was working towards in these days is unknown, though we can see the disastrous results in what had become of his legacy across the Imperium. The apparent adhesion of Corax to the Imperial Truth and his moderation in the use of force was enough to endear him to some of the more humane Primarchs, but his withdrawn nature made him unloved, if respected for his contributions to the Great Crusade. He rarely spoke with any of his brothers, save for during joint operations, and those were few and far between. The Raven Guard rarely needed assistance from other Imperial forces, and Corax preferred to keep his legion gathered in a massive expeditionary fleet. Rather than spread as elite contingency, as they had been in the past. The human elements of these fleets were all fiercely loyal to Corax first and foremost, most of them hailing from the worlds under his legion's protection. While the Raven Guard fought on thousands of battlefields during the Great Crusade, two particular battles stand out. The first was the compliance of the Ishvan system. Official records merely state that the Ishvanites were in the thrall of some ancient religion, and that their fanatical priests would never allow them to join the godless Imperium. By striking down these priests and destroying their temples, the Raven Guard proved that the gods worshipped by the Ishvanites were nothing more than lies, and the system was brought to compliance quickly. At the time, it seemed to be just one more conquest, if one led by the Raven Lord himself. But later events led to deeper investigations, which revealed the true story of the war, one that Corax had concealed from the Imperium. While the Raven Guards did perform surgical strikes against the temples and systems leadership, those did not lead to the population's submission. Instead, the people of Ishvan rose in a frenzy against the heretical invaders. The War Singers, Ishvan's war priestess, led the citizens in battle, flying above the fields of battle and unleashing powerful sonic shrieks that burst transhuman flesh within its armor. More than 80,000 Raven Guards were deployed on the surface of Ishvan III, mostly cloned Astartes. Despite suffering the horrendous losses, the people of Ishvan refused to surrender. After several days of brutal fighting, Corax determined that the Ishvanites were gathering all their forces around their capital, the Coral City. The Coral City was a wonder of architecture, whose great spires caught the winds to produce everlasting melodies. Intercepted transmissions indicated that the locals were defending something they considered holy, some secret of immense power. The Raven Lord decided to lead the assault on the Coral City himself, eager to see what the secrets were worth such a fanatical defense. His strike force tore to the Ishvanites with contemptuous ease, and the Primarch slaughtered a dozen of the war singers on his path to the city's center. A massive palace built atop the high plateau filled with tunnels and catacombs. From interrogating captives, Corax learned that the true center of the Ishvanite fate lay deep below the so-called Precentor's Palace. The Primarch journeyed into the tunnels, but what he found there, if anything, is unknown. When he emerged, he ordered his forces to withdraw from the Coral System, before commanding a large bombardment of the metropolis. Within a few minutes of the bombardment's beginning, the remaining leaders of Ishvan begged for mercy, imploring Corax to stop the destruction of their holy city, and willing to accept any terms the Raven Lord saw fit. Corax was relatively merciful, and Ishvan was declared compliant to the Imperium's rule, with one of the Primarch's own men, Vardro Alpral, left to act as governor of the system. Never before had Corax known fear. Even when he had been running through the corridors of his prison on Kavar, even when the knives had cut into his flesh, all that he had felt was anger and self-pity. Yet the voice made him tremble to his very soul. There was something in its intonation when it spoke his name, as if it knew him better than he knew himself. The environment was only increasing the dread he felt. At first, the catacombs had seemed ordinary enough. It had only been as they went deeper and deeper he had realized that the angles of the corridors didn't make sense, that the walls seemed to twist as soon as he did not look at them. He had been separated from his men, and all of his senses told him that there was no one alive besides him in this entire complex, though that couldn't possibly be true. Then he had seen the altar. It was a horrendous thing of bones and blood, pulsating with life it did not have any right to. Hundreds of figures in the pale robes had been kneeling before it in a chamber of impossible dimensions, all of them dead amidst a pool of their own blood, ritual knives still held in their hands' dead grips. And above the altar was where the terror existed, a wound into reality that opened upon vistas of nightmares and horrors never dreamt before this moment. The Raven Lord turned and ran, the voice mocking him all the way up the tunnels, only going silent once he emerged on the Ishvanitian dawn, with his warriors looking at him, puzzled by his sudden and unannounced return. Hiding his tension, he ordered that they leave the city at once, and while the fleet prepared to flatten the palace, and what lurked deep below, it was only once he was back on board his flagship, watching his vessel bombard the coral city, that he realized that the voice he had heard was his own. The other battle that have marked the Imperial Annals took place during the Second War of the Akum Sotos Cluster. Colonized by mankind during the First Diaspora, the cluster had been brought to compliance by the Luna Wolves in the Crusades' early days, with very little bloodshed, and yet a few years after Horus was named War Master, the people of Akuma Sotos went collectively insane, rejecting the rule of the Imperium. Reports indicate that they had fallen under the thrall of a breed of parasitic aliens, a sinister cabal of beings calling themselves the Unsighted Kings. Horus was determined to avenge this affront to his legion's honor, and demonstrate his authority to the Imperium at large. To this end, he gathered warriors from no less than 4 legions to his side: his own, the Sons of Horus, the Iron Warriors, and the Space Wolves, alongside the Raven Guard. With them came hundreds of Imperial regiments and Mechanicum Skitari legions. This was a gathering of forces not seen since the triumph of Ulanor, especially since each Astartes legion detachment was led by the legion's Primarch. While the general command fell to Horus without question, the War Master relied heavily on Perturabo's expertise during the campaign. For the Unsighted Kings had commanded their thralls to build a series of continent-spanning fortresses across the cluster. Apothecaries and Magos biologists soon determined that there was no cure for the Xenos corruption that had claimed the Akumusotos cluster's human population. The only solution was to purge them all, men, women, and children. It was a grim duty, but one none of the present legions would shy away from. Letting these unfortunate souls live under such tyranny was simply not an option. The campaign progressed well, with the fortresses of the Unsighted Kings falling one after the other. Yet the Xenos themselves always evaded imperial vengeance, fleeing before the legion's onslaught and leaving their enslaved minions to die in the millions to secure their escape. Yet after several months of brutal warfare, the Xenos overlords were finally cornered into their final fortress, surrounding from all sides, and with the assembled fleets watching from above for any sign of last-ditch attempts at flight. This last fortress was truly massive, nearly equaling the Imperial Palace on Terra. A careful plan was put together by Perturabo and Horus, one that would leave the honor of the first assault to the Space Wolves and the Sons of Horus, with the Iron Warriors and Raven Guard launching follow-up assaults on different paths of the fortress once the 6th and 16th Legions had drawn the attention of the Unsighted Kings. But Korax did not follow the plan. Instead of waiting, he unleashed an army of several tens of thousands of cloned Astartes on the entrance classified as Gate 42 of the Continental Fortress, just as Horus and Russ were launching their own assault. The artificial soldiers died by the thousands, but the gate was breached, and Korax himself led his elite warriors, known as the Deliverers, right through it. By the time the War Master managed to re-establish contact with the Raven Lord, Korax had already confronted the Unsighted Kings and slaughtered them, though not without losing nearly his entire cadre of bodyguards to their strange psychic powers. The following dispute between Horus and Korax was particularly violent. Horus accused his younger brother of spending his soldiers' lives carelessly, but all the Raven Lord heard was jealousy of his elder sibling that it had been the 19th Legion that had claimed the final victory. Then the discussion turned to the clones, and how Corax might be violating the edicts of the Emperor with such creations. The Raven Lords... how do I say this? The Raven Lords attempted to persuade Horus that his methods were the only way to meet the demands of the Great Crusade. But Horus refused to accept this, arguing instead that Astartes had to be human at the root, lest the transhuman powers that turns them into tyrants. Lest their transhuman power turns them into tyrants no better than the incited kings themselves. The two Primarchs parted on bitter terms, and the purge of the Akumu Sotos cluster was quickly concluded in a series of glorious bloodbaths. They would meet again once more at Nicaea, when the Emperor summoned his sons so that they may hear his judgment on the practices of the Librarius. Though Corax was present at the council, and his own legion made use of psychers, he gave no argument on one side or the other. He merely watched from the shadows, never saying a word. After the Emperor gave his decision, Horus tried to talk to Corax, hoping to reconcile. But the Raven Lord had already departed, returning to his part in the Great Crusade. Over the years, there would be 8 discussions like this. 8 times the Primarch sit and talk with one of his brothers, sharing with them the knowledge he had gained from the depths of the warp, and what he believed had to be done in light of these terrible revelations. 7 times the Primarch talking would be Guilliman. Once it would be the Lion. In each of these discussions, there would be a moment of outrage, of instinctual refusal, before the lies bore their way through an atrophied shell of nobility, and into the all too human heart of that lay beneath. Except this one. This one was different. In this case, the corruptor barely needed to speak before the offer was accepted. "I am with you," said Corax Robute, as the two of them sat in the private chambers of the Avenging Sun, aboard the McCree's Honor. "And I think I know just the place where we can begin." Heresy. A monstrous truth. Despite the dark rumors circulating about the 19th Legion, the betrayal of the Raven Guard during the Ishvan massacre caught the loyal legions completely by surprise. Even Horus, when he received word of the treachery of 3 more of his brothers, was most shocked by the turning of Corax. After all, did the Raven Lord not owe the Emperor his freedom from the clutches of the Techno-Lords of Clavar? But Corax remembered things differently. As Imperial Intelligence discovered when analyzing the intercepted transmission and broadcast proclamations brought back by the survivors of Ishvan V, in the eyes of the 19th Primarch, he and his brothers had been created by the Master of Mankind to serve as tools, instruments of conquest to be used and discarded once they had fulfilled their purpose. To him, the Emperor was no different from his old tormentors, and he wanted few things more than he craved to see him cast down. His loyal brothers were nothing more than willing slaves, and Horus, the only one of them he cared for, had been brainwashed by the Emperor so completely that only his death would free him from his chains. During the massacre, Corax led his legions of clones from the front, slaughtering hundreds of loyalist Astartes. He did not cross paths with any of his 3 loyal brothers present on the planet, but through its numbers, the Raven Guard reaped a terrible toll. Their clone warriors took heavy losses when the loyal Primarchs tore a path back to their gunships, fighting together. But such losses were insignificant to the Raven Lord. During the massacre, Corax led... but such losses were insignificant to the Raven Lord, who could replace them easily. Wrong. It was all wrong. Cousin was killing cousin on the black sands. Thousands of armored bodies laid on the ground. The air trembled with the screams of the loyal wounded and dying. And those were nothing compared to the horrible screeches of the treacherous living. A pale demigod had been slain by his dark brother. It was nothing. It wasn't supposed to happen. It had never been supposed to happen. The motion of the bolter in his hand felt distant, as if his hands were thousands of kilometers away as they pulled the trigger and sent another shell flying wildly off target. All around him his brothers were firing, a nearly solid wall of bolts that tore into the ranks of the Death Guard mercilessly. They had not been told this would happen until the order to open fire had come, but they had not questioned it. They had never questioned any order. Why would they start now? Because it was wrong. The warrior had no name. He had no voice either, for he had been born without a tongue. A simple defect that had been enough for him to be purged alongside the other failures. For years he had followed others, killing anyone he was commanded to kill. There had been nothing else in his life, nothing else in his mind. But no more. He screamed, a scream of outrage and fury, but also of defiance and birth. Around him his brethren shrugged and fell to their knees, their minds reeling from the sudden outburst. He continued to scream as he tore into them with his bare hands. Then with a sword he picked up from the corpses of his commander after ripping his head off. Confusion spread across the ranks, and he took advantage of it. He slipped through the cracks of his former brother's perception, vanishing from the sight through techniques he had suddenly realized he had always known. He flew through the ranks of the traitors and towards the remaining midnight-clad loyalists. He could see and hear them fighting still, desperate to reclaim the body of their sire. They needed his help. Whether or not they would accept it, he knew not, nor did he care. All that mattered to him was that he would not do the will of tyrants and monsters any more. Nevermore. So vowed the clone who would, in time, come to be known as Alator Rushal, captain of the Night Lord's Legion. Despite this, of all the traitor legions, the Raven Guard was responsible for the least evil and destruction during the dark days of the heresy, but only because they were being groomed by the dark gods to become far more dangerous later. Immediately after the Ishvan massacre, Korax took his entire legion with him and left for Klavar, the world he had avoided for decades. At that time, Klavar stood at the heart of the dominion of the Mechanicum, several systems unified under the will of the machine god. The tech lords of Klavar, responsible for Korax's tormented youth, were still in power, having escaped punishment by the Emperor in return for offering their fealty and returning his son to him. When word of the heresy reached them, the tech lords at first didn't care. Indeed, they saw it as an opportunity to reclaim their independence amidst the confusion. As communication with the rest of the Imperium became all but impossible in the growing warp storms, they declared that Klavar Nexus would stand on its own, without the need for outside aid. Then, they learned that the Raven Lord had sided with the rebels, and remembered the oaths of retribution made by the child they had imprisoned and tortured so long ago. Factories were converted to produce weaponry, orbital mining platforms became space forts, and hordes of menials were forcefully converted into combat servitors. The Forge Guilds prepared for war, gathering all resources they had on hand, digging devices from the Age of Strife out of confinement. But it was not enough. The 19th Legion tore through the self-proclaimed Klavar Nexus without mercy. Thousands of cloned Astartes swarmed world after world, alongside their monstrous kindred, freed from their cells for the first time since their grotesque births. They left no survivors in their wake, and yet we know much of the details of this war, for Korax made sure to leave extensive records on every planet he and his legion killed. Pillars of adamantium were left in the ruins of forged cities, engraved with precise accounts of the battles that took place there, written with so much detail that the characters cannot be read by human eyes and require scanners and alpexes to understand. Strangely, these accounts appear to be entirely faithful and not twisted to the favor of the Raven Guard in any way. Still, each of these pillars was claimed and hidden by the Inquisition during the Scouring. The contents of the pillars describing the Battle of Clavar itself are especially dangerous to the sanity of those who read them. Whatever enslaved remembrancer was tasked with writing the text must clearly have been losing his own mind by that point, forced to witness and record the horrors inflicted by the Raven Guard upon their enemies. According to the pillar, the Tech Lords were captured in the heart of their fortress before a single shot was fired on the planet, abducted by the Shadow Walkers, an elite group of legionnaires specialized in infiltration. They were brought on the bridge of the Shadow of the Emperor, Corax's ill-named flagship, and made to kneel before the one they had once tortured, to satisfy their curiosity. Then the Primarch forced them to watch as his fleet destroyed Clavar. The planet's orbital shields were taken down by the Shadow Walkers, and the surface of the world was pounded into dust by a relentless, ruthless bombardment that lasted for 6 entire days. All that time, Corax and the Tech Lords watched on, listening to the desperate pleas for help of the population broadcasted on the Vox. His back turned to his captives, the Raven Lord never said a word as he looked at the death of his homeworld. Lycius, the planet's moon, endured the same fate, but not before the Raven Guard had freed the prisoners used to mine its mantle for precious materials. These prisoners, criminals and innocent alike, only enjoyed their freedom for a short time, before they become the test subjects of the Raven Guard's apothecaries. The narrator of the pillars didn't witness the experiments, but he saw their results and what the knowledge gained from the trial and error was ultimately used to accomplish. Clavar destroyed, Corax turned his attention upon the Tech Lords once more. There were 13 of them, but of those only 9 had been alive when the Primarch had been captive on the Forge World. The 4 newer additions to the Circle were executed slowly over the course of several weeks, and again, the others were forced to watch. And more than watch, feel their pain. Using the augmentics of the Tech Lords against him, Corax made them feel the agony of the 4 sacrifices, each dying a horrible death that was specifically designed to appeal to one of the Dark Gods, based upon a copy of the Codex Chaotica Gulliman had offered to Corax after Ishvan. The purpose of these ritualized deaths was to bind the souls of the Tech Lords to their bodies, effectively granting them a form of immortality. Also that they would survive what was to come. One by one, Corax used everything he had learned from his son's experimentation on the prisoners to turn the Tech Lords into grotesque monsters, bloated abominations of flesh whose every moment was naught but pure distillated suffering. It took weeks combining sorcery with genetic modification and cruel surgery, and when it was done, the Tech Lords had become monsters, screaming and mewling at one from 100 mouths, their consciousness trapped within idiotic brains, unable to exert any control over their horrible bodies, and unable to die. These grotesque masses of flesh were locked deep within the bowels of the Shadow of the Emperor, where Corax would often come to torture them even further. All knowledge of what happened after the destruction of Clavar comes from the testimony of a single Raven Guard. This warrior, a former apothecary of the 19th Legion, went mad with remorse at his own actions after the end of the heresy. He fled from his brothers and was discovered during the Scouring, hiding among the human population of a feral world, providing them with medical care and protection from the beasts that haunted their world, all of which he had created himself before his crisis of conscience. Captured and brought back to the Sol System in chains, though he did not resist or attempt to escape, this renegade was interrogated extensively, before being executed for his crimes against the God Emperor. His name has since been forgotten, with only the title of the Mourning One remaining in the archives. It all made sense at the time. That, I think, is the true horror of it all. When Korax told us that we could use cloning to replenish our numbers, I thought it was a brilliant idea. I still remember the cries of my mother as the Legion took me from her, and I believe that avoiding another such sacrifice was well worth the research and mistakes made along the way. When he asked that we make sure the clones could not turn against us, well, that was simple good sense. Regardless of the damage our measures could cause to their minds, the prospect of them going rabid was much, much worse. Our legion would have been wiped out in retaliation. When Malcador's spies saw the morgue filled with the frozen bodies of our failures, preserved for future study, I could not let her escape. She would have exposed everything, and they wouldn't have understood why we had done it. They wouldn't have seen it. It had been necessary. Then came the betrayal. We didn't call it that, of course. To us, it was a righteous rebellion against a tyrant who had deceived all of mankind in a bid to become a god. So what if we had to shed blood? So what if we had to shed the blood of those we once called brothers? Was the future of our species not worth their sacrifice? The destruction of Clavar was easy after that. When Korax finally told us of his youth, of what he had suffered, we wanted nothing more than to avenge our father's pain. We didn't care that those we tormented to make this revenge complete were innocent. We were past caring at this point. And then came the journey into the damnable realm. The plunge head first into the abyss in search of the truth. Oh, that truth. That terrible, terrible truth. The glorious madness of it all, the sound of our reality shattering, and the voices. They were laughing at us, laughing at the war, laughing at everything. At this point in the record, the subject breaks down into incoherent screaming for several hours before recovering enough to be able to continue. They watched then, as they watch now. They watched from within, not from without. From within. The subject fell into silence after speaking these words, staring right in front of him, without seeming to actually see anything. He only stared, speaking again 6 days later, to continue his tale, regardless of the pressure applied to his body and mind by the Inquisition. Extract from the Confession of the Mourning One. According to the confession, and the act of finally claiming his vengeance, and his terrible cost, shattered what little remained of Korax's morality. The hideous experiments that had required also pushed the Legion's apothecaries, already teetering on the brink of their work in cloning, deep into amorality and outright madness. With Clavar gone, however, Korax was suddenly without a focus for his hatred. For several weeks, the Raven Lord brooded in orbit of the shattered husk of his homeworld, taking his frustration out on his captives. Meanwhile, his legion descended further into corruption, with the sorcerers who had cast the spells upon the Tech Lords exploring new areas of their unholy craft. Ultimately, it was one of their rituals that gave Korax his new course of action. Aboard the Shadow of the Emperor, a group of sorcerers attempted to summon demons and bind them into the bodies of the gene-forged humans, designed by the apothecaries to be more resilient to possession, in the hope of creating possessed warriors without the risk of the lives of the Astartes. But the ritual went horribly awry, ending in the death of not just the sacrifices, but the 7 Legion Psychers involved as well. Worse, a powerful creature of the warp incarnated itself through the ruined flesh, but instead of rampaging across the ship, it remained within the ritual circle and called for Korax to come and meet it. Ever since witnessing the power the Ultramarines had gained during the Ishvan massacre, Korax had been jealous of Guilliman and had sought a way to emulate him. The Raven Lord feared that once the rebellion had succeeded, he might end up just as another servant of Guilliman, rather than an equal. While vengeance against the Emperor had been Corax's primary motivation for siding with Guilliman, the desire to be free from the fear of destruction at his overlord's hand had also played a part, and he did not want to simply replace one master for another. And so, he chose to risk the meeting. In the past, Corax had seen the result of botched teleports, when the flesh and armor of the unfortunate warriors was melted together. The creature that stood in the center of the ritual circle looked very much like one of such failure, if exceptional in scope. Atrophied human limbs emerged from a mass of flesh and ceramite, and transhuman faces stared at him from various angles. The faces of the librarians who had attempted the rituals, yet as disgusting as the creature's appearance might be, Corax knew that it was nothing but a disguise covering up his true face. A puppet of flesh whose strings were pulled by some unnatural intelligence. The mouth of all things 6 heads opened at once and spoke with eerie synchronization. Corvus Corax, scion of the Emperor of Mankind. At last we meet. I am no son of this tyrant, creature, growled the Primarch. It laughed a discordant chorus of voices, that he knew his son's voices, though it had been a long time indeed since the last time he had heard any of them laugh. You cannot deny the blood that flows through your veins, Lord of Ravens. That is one of the many lessons you will need to learn on the path to glory. The creature introduced itself as an envoy from a greater power, the Yellow King, of which nothing had ever been heard of before, and nothing ever since. It offered to show Corax the path to true power and knowledge, claiming that the Raven Lord's ascension would serve the designs of his own master in the long term. The Primarch accepted, and the entity that called itself the Voice led the 19th Legion to the place holding the revelations it promised, the Eye of Terror. It had been there that Guilliman had discovered the primordial truth and claimed the power of the Dark Master of Chaos, and would be there that Corax would be reborn into the horror he is to this day. According to the Morning One, the journey was exactly as peaceful as one would expect. Demons attacked the fleet at every turn. Navigators and astropaths went mad, quickly followed by other members of the crew. The Voice guided the Raven Guard deeper and deeper into the Eye, and it seemed as if the Dark Gods themselves were trying to prevent the Legion from reaching its destination. Each of the ruinous powers sent one of its demon lords against Corax. First, to offer him power if he bent the knee to that demon's patron. Then, to try to kill him when he refused. The Raven Lord turned down each offer and defeated each demon, and eventually the fleet reached its destination. At the very center of the Eye of Terror, there was, and likely still is, an anomaly in the fabric of space-time greater than even the rest of the madness that makes up the warp storm around it. In ancient times, the first human astronomers named such things black holes. Even at the height of the Dark Age of technology, these all-consuming pits of infinite gravity weren't fully understood. The scraps of lore that have survived from that time indicate that while the black holes originate from purely physical causes, such is the power involved in their existence that they somehow interfere with the warp itself, despite not being any spiritual presence of their own. The Voice told Corax that this black hole was the singularity that had been created when Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Chaos and Doom of the Eldar, had been brought into existence by the corruption of the children of Isha. And if Corax wanted to claim the power the Voice had promised him, he would need to take his fleet right into it. Why Corax accepted such an obvious dangerous course of action is unknown to us. Perhaps he saw something in the infinite darkness of the black hole that called to him. Perhaps his mind was manipulated by his guide. Or perhaps he was indulging in some suicidal impulse. The repenting Raven Guard never spoke of what happened when the Legion plunged into the black hole at Corax's command. According to the records, all attempts to make him talk about it ended with him either remaining stoically silent or descending into wordless screams and rants that caused fugues of madness in all who heard them and malfunctions in recording devices. But while we might never know the details, we have other sources. Forbidden scrolls written by arch-heretics long after their heresy, and the psychic nightmares haunting the imperial psychers who lived when the 19th crossed the ultimate threshold. According to those, Corax was shown the true nature of chaos, that which so few of the lost and the damned actually understand, and which is kept secret from all but the most trustworthy of imperial servants. Corax learned about the near mythical war in the heaven, tens of millions of years before the age of the Imperium. He witnessed with his own eyes the conflict between the Necrontyrs and the Old Ones, and was shown the distortion and the warp created by this godly conflict, one that makes the heresy pale into insignificance by comparison. He saw how this perversion eventually caused the fall of the Eldar, annihilating their eons-old empire in a single moment. And most damning of all, he saw how the taint of chaos had fused with the soul of man, feeding from its darkness and dragging it closer to the ruin. The entire Legion shared in these unholy revelations, and those who survived were utterly broken by the realization that the very universe in which they lived was tainted by an evil older than the entire species, and one that had owned them long before they had been born. If you truly know all that was, is, and will be, then answer me this, Corax challenged the incorporeal voice as his surroundings started to dissolve into blackness once more. What does my future hold? A choice, whispered the voice right into his ear. Now he had only one voice instead of 6, and it was not one that belonged to any of his dead librarians, nor to anything human at all. You will go to Terra to join in Guilliman's last strike against the Emperor, and your brother Horus will be there. If you fight him, you will kill him, and he will be free from the shackles that he wears now, as well as those he will have to suffer if you let him die at another's hands. But the Knights of Saturn's moon will fight through the Firstborn's horde, and your rebellion will be defeated. And what is my other choice? Go to Titan yourself, and leave Horus to die under the fangs of the fallen angel, his spirit consumed by the thirst of the Dark Prince slave. Do this, and the Emperor will fall at Guilliman's hands. Corax himself was convinced that what he had seen meant that the Emperor had to be defeated more than ever, that the only way for mankind to survive was to accept the primordial truth, no matter how ugly it might have been. He surrendered to the primeval evil, of chaos, and was remade into a demon prince primarch of chaos undivided, a being of immense power enough to guide his legion out of the abyss in which they had willingly cast themselves, and back into reality. Their ascension caused the Psychers all across the galaxy to scream as one. Their minds suddenly swarmed with incomprehensible visions. The Astronomicon flickered, and on all craft worlds, Farseers fell to their knees while the Infinity Circuit hollowed in agony. Even Lionel Johnson, who had by then turned from the Maelstrom as the demon Primarch of Tzeentch, was struck by the psychic wave caused by Corax's transformation. Nightmares of shattered casualty, the agonized screams of reality, the birthed cry of damnation, and the last gasp of hope are but some of the terrible meanings that pieced together from the psychic cataclysm. In the gestation pods, he saw his own hypocrisy reflected back at him as he remembered the ranks of his cloned warriors, how he had denounced the Emperor for using him and his brothers as tools, while creating his own sacrificial pawns. But he also saw that it did not matter. The strong used the weak. That was the way of things. The Emperor had been wrong in that the Primarchs had been created too strong enough that it was inevitable they would see the truth sooner or later. What he had used in their creation had bound him to the very thing he was so foolishly hoping to destroy. Korax could understand his father's will to accomplish this. In a way, he even admired the determination of the old monster. But he had seen too much to believe it was possible to defeat the primordial annihilator. His father was deceiving himself just as much as he was deceiving the Imperium. Chaos could not be defeated. It had existed for far too long, grown far too powerful. The only choice was to either embrace it or be destroyed by it. Alarms started to ring as his presence abruptly became more real. But he ignored them, and the savants suddenly aware of his intrusion and fleeing and shouting. He was looking at the huge machinery on the other side of the room, and he had recognized it for what it was. An immense Gellerfield device, reinforced with runes engraved on its circuitry, whatever. Slowly he walked towards it, feeling the weight of destiny grow heavier with every step, until at last he stood right before the cables that powered it, the protective field. "You know what you have to do," said the voice before fading away, never to be heard again. And he did. But before he could move, the door of the laboratory opened suddenly, and the power flooded the room. Power Korax knew well. He turned and saw his father standing. And saw his father standing, and he did. But before he could move, the door of the laboratory opened shut, and there he saw his father standing, fully armed. Now I get it. Power Korax knew well. He turned and saw his father standing there, fully armored and showing the aspect he only showed when about to kill. "I will not let you destroy all that I have worked for," said the golden giant. His light burned Korax's eyes, but he refused to let out the tears that would appease the pain. He had long vowed never to cry again. "It is far, far too late for that," he snarled in response, and plunged his lightning claws into the Gellerfield's generator. Raw energy coursed back up his claws and right into his body, tearing him apart on an atomic level. Yet before the current could destroy him, the Gellerfield went down, and the war poured into the room. It reached towards the incubation pods, but before Korax could see what it would do with them, he was snatched away from the laboratory and his imminent death, and plunged into a smoldering cauldron of primal power. Time travel, I guess. Soon after escaping the Eye of Terror, the battered fleet of the 19th Legion received the astropathic call of Guilliman. The traitor legions were about to conquer the last system standing between them and Terra, and the arch-traitor was calling for the rest of his renegade siblings to him for the final battle against the Emperor and his lackeys. Of the voice there was no sign. The Yellow King's envoy had vanished when the Legion had crossed the event horizon. Never again would any of the Legion's warriors cross the path of their guide to damnation. "Oh, I will come, my dear brother," said Korax to the still image of Robout, as if he could hear him and carry his words back to the avenging sun. And maybe he could, reflected Vincent Six. Stranger things had happened the last few. Had those only been days? It felt like centuries. "My lord," he dared to say, kneeling before the shadow-shrouded silhouette of his Primarch. "Our ships are badly damaged, and we have taken considerable losses. Most of the clones are dead. Those who aren't are changed, and our chief apothecary is lost. If we go to Terra now, we will be unable to provide any significant aid to Lord Guilliman." The gaze of the Raven Lord descended upon him, and he felt his blood freeze in his veins. "That," replied the Primarch, "will not be a problem, Chief Apothecary 6. Somehow the promotion did not feel as good as he would have thought. The Siege of Terra. And lo, the carrion birds have descended upon the ancient home of mankind. bringing with them the corruption of blood and flesh, the ruination of soul. In the heart of their master burns a hatred and bitterness unlike any other, and he will not stop until all good in the galaxy has been snuffed out, until all have suffered as he has, for vengeance is all he has left. Excerpt from the Canticle of the Dead. For all the power Corax had personally gained in the Eye of Terror, the 19th Legion had taken grievous losses. Tens of thousands of replica Astartes had died, their weakling souls unable to resist the fire of revelation. The human crews of the Raven Guard's ship had either died, gone insane, or been merged with their vessels, performing their function for the rest of eternity. The surviving Raven Guards were barely able to get the fleet moving, let alone fight. But Corax had a solution. The same one he had used when he had first taken command of the Legion, though this time the means of its implementation would be even more darker. All across the fleet, apothecaries set to work, their minds overflowing with the unholy knowledge that had been bestowed upon them in the Great Eye. They harvested the corpses of the dead crew and used them to clone tens of thousands of mutants, nearly mindless creatures that nonetheless had inherited some of the memories of the originals, just enough to perform the most basic yet vital duties of the crew. With the help of the Legion's sorcerers, they summoned the demons that had consumed the souls of the most valuable crew members and bound them into new bodies, forcing them to serve the Raven Guard by functioning as overseers for the clones. Meanwhile, with the help of his new chief apothecary, Vincent VI, Corax was expanding the cloning labs aboard the Shadow of the Emperor. Entire sections of the Gloriana-class warship were transformed to horrible biological machines that pulsated with infernal vitality and spat out hundreds of new cloned Astartes by the day. These creatures, though battle-ready, were hideous monstrosities, the first spawn marines, as the Raven Lord himself called them. By the time the fleet reunited with the rest of the Traitor Legion's armada, every ship was steaming with hundreds of spawn marines under the control of the remaining purebloods. If Guilliman was surprised by the transformation of his brother, he did not make any mention of it during the preparation for the assault on Sol. As the Traitor Primarch gathered, Leman Rus and Jagatai Khan's conspicuous by their absence, it was decided that Corax and his legion would be tasked with securing the back of the invasion force on Terra. The Sol system was, after all, the heart of the Imperium, and the place Perturabo has spent years preparing for war. Traitor's intelligence indicated that there were hundreds of space forts spread across the system, but all of which could hide a secreted blade ready to strike when the rebel armada was the most vulnerable. Strangely, Corax agreed to what many saw as an insulting assignment. He only asked that some of his warriors be allowed to deploy on Terra, arguing that their infiltration skills would be very useful in breaching the Imperial Palace. None of those present were ready to argue with what the Raven Lord had become, and so the change in plan was approved. The Traitor Armada emerged from the warp on the edge of the Sol system, and the first phase of the Heresy's final battle began. Soon the orbital defenses of Terra were broken, and the siege of the Imperial Palace began as the traitorous legions and their allies landed on Throne World in their millions. Among them were the warriors chosen by Corax to represent his legion, the greatest battle of mankind's long and bloody history. Only the greatest of his purebloods had been judged worthy of this honor, and they fought at the forefront of the siege, hunter-killer teams stalked by squads of loyalists and wreaked havoc within the walls of the palace, drawing precious resources away from the walls in order to track them down. Others fought on the battlements alongside the traitor legions, and the greatest of those was Nikona Sorokin, who would in later years become a legend as a champion who become a legend as a champion of Chaos Undivided. Nikona Sarokyo, he who hunts above. There are few things capable of inspiring dread in the heart of a legionnaire, but Nikora Sarokin is one of them. Taken by the Raven Guard as a child from an unknown world, he was transformed into an Astartes through their Primarch's discovery on Klavar. Soon he showed incredible ability, both at the arts of stealth and with the blade, becoming one of the greatest swordsmen of all the legions. Though due to the legion's isolation, this only became clear during their heresy. Unlike most duelists, he specialized in dual-wielding his mind, capable of keeping track of the complex dance of both blades as he fought human and Xenos alike, combined with his talents as a shadow walker, and there was nothing Sarokin could not kill once he was pointed at the target by his commanders. Like all the Raven Guard veterans of the heresy, Sarokin was changed by the Legion's first journey into the Eye of Terror. He returned armed with a pair of strange blades, forged from an unknown material that does not seem to obey the laws of physics. He also appeared to have fused with his armor, unable to remove it, but also no longer needing any mortal sustenance. During the Siege of Terra, Sarokin fought and killed many heroes of the Imperium, from Imperial Army commanders to Skitarii Alphas and up to chapter masters of the loyal Space Marine legions. When the 3rd and 8th Legion arrived to save the day for the Loyalists, Sarokin fought against Lucius the Reborn and killed him as the son of Fulgrim tried to save a 1,000-son seer named Revuel Arvida, whom he slew minutes later. During the heresy, Revuel had written several prophecies that have since come true over the course of the last millennia, without exception, leading some, in the Inquisition, to wonder if there was more to these two particular killings. Sarokin has survived to this day, becoming a dreadful legend both among the Imperium and in the ranks of the lost and the damned. He is said to have become the executioner of the primordial annihilator, the one dispatched by the unfathomable will of chaos to slay his chosen victims. None have ever survived crossing blades with him, or did any of his targets ever escape his hunt. Yet unlike a champion akin to Sigismund the Destroyer, Sarokin never seems to reveal in his triumph, merely moving on to the next target with cold detachment. He might ally with a warband for a time, whether or not it is led by one of his legion's brothers is irrelevant, if it will help him get close to his target. But these alliances never last long, and he himself does not lead any forces. Primitive human tribes across the galaxy whisper legends of the Dark Hunter, the slayer of heroes who stalks the realm of gods and men alike. It is among these feral tribes that the Inquisition learned of the base translation of Sarokin's warp-given title, He Who Hunts Above. The translation loses some of the meaning of the title in the feral tribe's language, which also, of course, differs greatly from the original demonic pronunciation. The title refers to how Sarokin seems to always be greater than his foes, and sent by an entity above, even the primitive gods these people tend to worship, whether they are a reflection of the Emperor or a disguise of the ruinous powers. Meanwhile, the rest of the Raven Guard was fighting across the entire Sol system. As Guilliman had predicted, Petrabo had hidden hundreds of small forces. Many of them had come from outside the Sol system during their heresy, and weren't trusted enough to be allowed on Terra. The Raven Guard's full numbers were required to contain them, as well as maintain the blockade of Mars, the Red Planet. The Red Planet had been reclaimed by the Iron Warriors at a great cost. Kilbor Hall, Fabricator General and Supreme Leader of the Mechanicum, was determined to honor his oath to Terra, just as Terra has honored its to Mars. But unlike what he had promised Guilliman, Corax himself did not take part in these battles, nor did he supervise from his flagship. Instead, the Raven Lord descended upon Titan, fortress of the Grey Knights, accompanied by the worst of the monsters he had created on the way to Terra. Creatures so monstrous it was impossible to distinguish them from the Neverborn, brought by the Master of Shadows. Leaving the leadership of the system-wide battles to his commanders, Corax joined forces with the demon prince Be'lakor, acting on a prophecy he had received in the Eye of Terror. It is recorded that the demon Primarch clashed against Janus, the legendary first Grand Master of the Grey Knights. Neither of them prevailed, and the battle ended when one of them, the archives do not record which, withdrew from the duel. The Battle of Titan was the first deployment of the Grey Knights in battle, as well as the first time the men and women chosen by Malcador to be the first Inquisitors fought against the corruption of the Warp in their new role. For months, both of these forces fought together, human and transhuman, against the tide of the demons and flesh-crafted horrors led by Be'lakor and Corax. Losses on both sides were terrible, but the servants of Ruin cared nothing for the lives of their soldiers. While every combatant lost by the Imperium was replaceable, yet eventually victory came to the Imperium. Without Corax to guide them, the commanders of the Raven Guard had failed to prepare for the sudden arrival of the Emperor's Children and Night Lord's Legion. The two fleets emerged from the webway and struck the traitor armada with vengeful force. Corax was forced to leave Titan, which soon led to Be'lakor being banished by the Grey Knights and rejoin his fleet to lead the battle against the Third Legion in orbit around Terra. That day, the Inquisition and the Grey Knights learned a valuable lesson: that the greatest weapon in their arsenal was their enemy's own nature, its innate tendency to destroy itself through mistakes or outright betrayal. Driven to desperation by the arrival of the 3rd and 8th Legions, and the tidings that the 12th and 17th would not be long in coming, Guilliman led the final assault on the Imperial Palace. Still scattered across the Sol system by the individual pursuits of its commanders, the Raven Guard fleet was unable to properly contain the Emperor's Children, and the Third's flagship was able to position itself just above the Imperial Palace, in time for Fulgrim to teleport in the deepest chamber of the Cavea Ferrum and strike at Guilliman before he could deal the final blow to the Emperor. Post-Heresy. Legacy of Horrors. In the darkness of eternal night, prepare for the hunt to continue. The light of dawn, that which brings salvation, is gone and shall return. Nevermore, 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 nevermore. So embrace the dark things and hidden deep within, beyond the sleight of mortal men. Let loose the horror and become one with it. Welcome it into your blood. For this galaxy has a place left only for abominations and monsters. From a ruined parchment recovered in the den of a cult of the Raven after purging by the Inquisition. After the fall of Guilliman, Corax took his legion back to the Eye of Terror. Though the Dark Master of Chaos had fallen, the Raven Lord was still confident that ultimately victory would come to the Primordial Annihilator. In his eyes, it was inevitable. The defeat at Terra was merely a small setback in a war that had been going on for tens of millions of years. In the end, though the Imperium might endure for a few millennia, it would fall like all empires fell. And the Raven Guard would be here to bring forth a new age for mankind when that happened. And in order to prepare for that time, the 19th Legion made preparations on its way to the Eye of Terror. Corax commanded the fleet divided in many groups, each taking a different road through the ruined Imperium towards the same destination. Each group stopped on nearly every human world it passed by, but it was not to lay waste or enslave its people. Instead, the Raven Guard descended upon these worlds under the cover of night, abducting a few members of the ruling class and releasing them a few days later with no memory of what had happened to them. These individuals, fearful of the hole in their memories, rushed to return to their homeworlds, eager to resume their lives and forget about this unsettling episode. This reclaimed normalcy was a lie, for these abductees were no longer purely human. Instead, they were children of the Raven, and their bloodlines would plague the Imperium for millennium to come. The children of the Raven. There are many stories in the Imperium of noble families with dark secrets, hiding misshapen cousins in the attic, or keeping the psychotic streak of black sheep under wraps to avoid loss of prestige. In many cases, such degeneracy can be traced back to inbreeding over thousands of years, due to the elitism and obsession with the purity of the bloodline that is so common across the Imperium's ruling class. But in some cases, the corruption runs deeper, and when it comes to the surface, the results are much more horrifying. These are the children of the Raven, and the Inquisition has worked tirelessly for 10,000 years in order to keep their existence secret. During the heresy, and sporadically afterwards, the 19th Legion had created the children and placed them in the Imperium, waiting for their work to blossom and cause untold damage and horror. The children are hidden lineages of genetic abominations, humans who carry within them the taint of the Raven Guard's genetic perversion. The root of every such lineage is a single individual, captured and experimented upon in order to place the curse within his genes. A mix of mutations, genetic engineering, and the raw insanity of the warp, often based on a sample from the twisted tech lords of Clavar. These individuals will then spread their corruption to their children, and then them to their own. Only a few of these bloodlines are aware of what they are. The Raven Guard seems to take great pleasure in the ignorance of their tools in the long war against the Imperium. Certainly, many an inquisitor has prayed to the Emperor for forgiveness after being forced to kill an entire family down to the newborn in order to ensure the complete purge of a lineage of children. No bloodlines are twisted in identical ways, but there are patterns that repeat themselves, methods to the madness of Korax and his scions. Some strains only cause monsters to appear every few generations, causing a series of gruesome murders, suspiciously similar to those described in sealed records of local law enforcement about cases from decades past. These are the sources of many hive legends, telling of werbeasts and boogeymen that prey upon those who wander in the streets after dark. While dangerous to individuals unlucky enough to cross their paths, they possess little threat to the Imperium as a whole. Still, many a team of unprepared acolytes has perished under the claws of fangs of the beasts responsible for the killings they were investigating, never knowing they were facing the ancient legacy of a demon Primarch. But other bloodlines are more dramatic in their changes, and the changes they cause, granting titanic masses of twisted flesh endowed with psychic powers capable of tearing apart the veil of reality and usher in demon incursions of unique flavor. Such horrible things are often worshipped as gods by the deluded cults, praying for the day when they are elevated and brought into the realm of their divine masters. These are the strains that, if allowed to reach maturity, require nothing less than a Grey Knight intervention to purge. Fortunately, there are always signs long before things reach this point, and the Inquisition is ever watchful for them. These signs include, but are never limited to, a sudden rise in mutation rates among newborn, specifically visions of twisted cities of flesh haunting those psychically sensitive, and hive quakes as the creature's psychic powers is agitated by its tormented nightmares. Unfortunately, these signs are also difficult to distinguish from any other source of demonic incursion, which leads to the members of the Ordos unaware of the children of the Raven, facing them unprepared for what awaits them. According to the Grey Knights, the incursions caused by the children are strange indeed, for they do not so much bring demons onto the world of matter as twist all flesh caught within them until it is all but impossible to distinguish what was once an imperial citizen from a horror birthed in the Sea of Souls. While some children of the Raven reveal in their impurity, most have no idea of what they are, and react to the changes in their flesh with horror and disgust. In some cases, their kin might have kept records of the previous occurrences of this family disease, which might help deal with the transformation, but will never provide any cure, for there are none. Many turn to prayer, calling upon the God Emperor to save them, but their souls are damned from before they are even born, and their fate is inevitable. Only through death can they avoid succumbing to the monster within. Even those children, lucky enough not to manifest the traits of their line, are still hunted, tormented creatures, their nights plagued by nightmares of blood and madness. Few live long lives, though it is rare indeed that they kill themselves before having sired children of their own, ensuring the continuity of their accursed lineage. Some of the greatest heretics the Imperium has ever known have risen from their ranks, and as the corruption of their family, unable to express itself through their flesh, instead took hold in their mind. Every bloodline of the children has a distinct pattern to its manifestation, a set of criteria both genetically and mystically determined whether or not an individual will express the strain. Some families attempt to uncover the pattern in desperate hope of preventing further manifestations, but these efforts never work out. In recent times, with the threat of the gene stealers discovered by the Ordos Xenos, there have been some incidents of two threats being mistaken for another. However, it has been found that the children of the Raven are immune to the gene stealer's kiss, the repugnant method by which the Xenos inflict another being with its foul genetics. The Raven's blood, it seems, does not tolerate any other influence upon those it has claimed as its own. A small cabal of radical inquisitors who have dedicated their lives to rooting out the taint of the children have used this to their advantage, in a truly ruthless manner. They use captive gene stealers to deliberately infect members of the family suspected to be carrying the Raven Lord's touch. For a while, no one has ever managed to create a mean to reliably test someone for the taint of Corax's corruption. There are ways to detect genetic taint, the genetic taint of the Tyranid blood. If the test subject is infected, then it seems that his family does not belong to the children, and the subject is executed after being given the Emperor's blessing. If he is not, however, then his entire bloodline must be purged. Some other inquisitors decry this practice as both inhumane, wasteful, and potentially dangerous. They believe that it is possible that some humans are just naturally immune to the gene stealer's corruption, a gift that could be very useful to mankind. But these radicals threaten to make extinct. Still, this practice is a lot less dangerous and morally tainted than the few radicals who go as far as employing the services of the children in their warband, keeping them under control through a variety of means. Their mission complete, the warbands reunited in the Eye of Terror, and the 19th Legion followed its Primarch to their homeworld. There they built their fortresses, and the apothecaries constructed the ignominious demonic incubators from which the spawn marines would emerge for thousands of years to come. This construction, however, didn't go smoothly, as the influence of the Eye of Terror caused the spawn marines created to be almost all too mutated to even carry a weapon. Without their cannon fodder, the Raven Guard could not expand their domain in the Great Eye as the other legions were doing at the time. As a result, the Legion Wars erupted between the Blood Angels and the Imperial Fists, and then spread to the rest of the Eye. The Raven Guard took little part in the conflict. After a few attempts to attack their homeworld ended up with the broken survivors fleeing for their lives, the rest of the traitor legions learned to stay away from the territory of the 19th. But the Legion Wars would also bring the Raven Guard a solution to their recruiting problem. The beginning of the Legion Wars within the Eye of Terror caused the end of the Clone Wars outside, and the arch-renegade Fabius Bio found himself hounded at every turn. Seeking to avoid the wrath of both Blood Angels and Imperial Fists, he came to the Raven Guard. With him came the remnants of the Black Legion he had created from the corpses of Horus Lupercal. An alliance was forged between Corax and the Clone Lord, with the Raven Lord offering asylum to the former Chief Apothecary. Bio learned much about the gene-smithing, cloning, and the creation of Astartes, and the true nature of the warp and how to manipulate it. In return, the renegade children of the Emperor helped the apothecaries of the 19 Legions stabilize their spawning incubators, allowing the mutating energies of the Eye of Terror, finally allowing stabilizing their spawning incubators against the mutating energies of the Eye of Terror, finally allowing the Raven Guard to replenish its ranks with tens of thousands of spawn marines. Eventually, Fabius Bile, where was it? Okay, eventually Bile and his Raven Guard host parted ways. But surprisingly, this separation wasn't violent, ending in fire and betrayal are so many covenants do among the damned. The Clone Lord realized that while his interests and the apothecaries laid in similar directions, their ultimate goals differed. Bao's goals then, and perhaps even now, though the mind of this madman is impossible to know, was to create a new, stronger human form, one that would be able to survive no matter what, even without the aid of chaos. The Raven Guard, however, wants to fuse the warp and the flesh into a perfect union, allowing mankind to evolve into something beyond mortality. The Clone Lord saw the Dark Gods as nothing but pretenders, false divinities holding trillions of souls in thrall through lies. This blasphemy against the primordial truth could have caused him to be slain by the Raven Guard. And yet they did not. Perhaps they thought that one day the son of Fulgrim would come around to their viewpoint. Perhaps they knew that whatever his beliefs, Bile was doing Chaos's work. Regardless of the truth, Bile left the Legion's homeworld with his own servants and the blessing of the Raven Lord in order to continue his research. According to legend, the Temporary Alliance created one thing beyond the stabilizing incubators. A perfect hybrid of humanity and demonkind, born of Fabius's own gene seed, mixed with others and what passes for blood in the Neverborn. This creature, called Melcian, is little more than an obscure legend, even in the Eye of Terror. She has never been seen in Imperial space. Perhaps she cannot leave the warp storm in the same way demons are unable to. What is certain is that the Raven Guard's apothecaries still believe in her existence and search for her across the Eye, thinking that within her blood lies the secret to the union they have been seeking for 10,000 years. To this day, the apothecaries of the 19th Legion lament their separation from Fabius Bile, heretical as his views on chaos might be. They respect his insane genius immensely, and are still hoping that someday the Raven Guard and the Black Legion will join forces to bring the horrifying wonders to the galaxy. The Clone Lord finally illuminated on the primordial truth. There are debates among the Inquisition where the Raven Guard or the Clone Lord are responsible for the greatest genetic atrocities. But these debates are secret affairs, held only in the few moments of respite of individuals burdened by one of the most terrible responsibilities of the Holy Ordos. For while the Raven Guard might not be the most powerful of all traitor legions in strictly military terms, though the hordes of spawn marines are still a considerable threat, they are the one the Inquisition is the most wary of. The Dark Angels might plot in the shadows for hundreds of years, awaiting for the dreaded design to come to fruition, but even they lack the corruptive ability of the Raven Lords yet. The Sons of Sanguinius might spread their delusion to all those around them, but they cannot twist flesh and soul for generations yet to be born. And the disciples of the Dragon, for all their cruelty and arrogance, are nothing but deluded fools embracing the false promises of Vulcan, not a threat to mankind's very essence. Knowledge of the 19th is heavily restricted, as madness has always plagued those who know too much about it. Only a very select group is allowed to know about the Raven Guard and the Holy Ordos. Unlike with many other secrets of the Inquisition, this is not to prevent heresy and betrayal, but truly to safeguard those who are not strong enough to endure and go on after being exposed to these terrible possibilities. The war fought against the Raven Guard is one of secrecy, even by the Inquisition's standards, and the burden of keeping the truth hidden, even from one's fellow Inquisitors, lies heavy upon the most resolute of minds. Even the loyal Space Marines who fight against the creatures of the Raven Lord are too detached from humanity to truly realize the scope of the threat they possess. Few recruits into the circle of brave Excuse me. New recruits into the circle of brave, unsung heroes are chosen from among those who confront the mortal servants of Korax. The loose gathering of heretics identified as the Cult of the Raven. Boy, this one has no right to be this long. Anyway, the Cult of the Raven. Among all the heretical cults to ever plague the Imperium, few are more dangerous than the deluded worshippers of Korax. Commonly known as the Cult of the Raven, these sects are spread widely across the Imperium, each cell rarely making contact with the others. The adherents of the cult believe that the Imperium enforces a lie upon its population with its pretense of civilization and false faith, keeping the human species from fulfilling its true potential. To them, the children of the Raven are the incarnation of that potential, and they worship them as such. It is unheard of for the Raven-touch bloodlines to be observed by the cults for generations, waiting for someone to manifest the trait of their dark heritage. These unfortunates are then abducted, worshipped, and kept prisoners in equal measure. The obsession of imperial nobility with keeping track of their bloodlines makes it easy for the cult to track their descendants of the monsters of previous centuries. More than one scholar tasked with the keeping of genealogies is actually an agent of the cult, using his position to search for the spawn of those families that were purged by the Inquisition long ago. One of the most dangerous tools of the cult is the ritual of the Dark Conduit. This ritual, which involves human sacrifice and prayers to the Raven Lord, grants knowledge of the warp at the cost of sanity. All new inductees into the cult go through the Dark Conduit, and the most veteran members undergo it multiple times, each one consuming a little more of their sanity and replacing it with unhallowed lore. The ritual was designed by Korax himself during the heresy, when he sought a means to surpass Guilliman's own knowledge of the Empyrean, and is contained within countless grimoires his agents circulate into the Imperium. A cell of the cult is generally started by someone stumbling upon one such book and performing the ritual, or by a member of another cell sent by his master to start a new branch of the cult. As a result of this practice, the cultists of the Raven are distributed between the madmen and the fanatics, depending on how they reacted to their initiation. They rarely involve the elite of the Imperium, save for those belonging to the children. Cultists keep up appearance as best they can, helping each other to survive on the fringes of society, where their madness might go unnoticed. They gather and perform dark cults, begging the ruinous powers for their blessings. Most of them have lost all sense of self-preservation, and will not hesitate to offer their own life as sacrifice to the dark gods. Those who react best to the Dark Conduit, losing parts of their soul rather than their minds, becoming magi and guide the cult, perform rituals and interpret ramblings. Wait, I think I jumped over something. Become magi. Okay, no. Oh boy, these ones lately have started to just been mashed together with no spaces in between, and it makes them harder. The dream of the cultist is to be visited by an emissary of the Raven Lord and made into children of the Raven themselves. To that end, they pursue various goals. They tend to... God damn it. The dream of the cultist, Asha, they tend to focus on gathering forbidden lore more than weapons, for pursuit of the primordial truth is paramount to them. Korax experiments are, after all, proof that knowledge truly is power. As a result, many cultists are malefic scholars of varying skills, seeking sources of lore beyond the conduit. Some explore the depths of the Underhive and other abandoned places in search of the temples built by previous incarnations of the cult, eager to plunder their secrets. Sometimes they uncover the remnants of the children of the Raven, left to rot after its worshippers were wiped out, and work toward its resurrection. Others perform dark rituals and gene-splicing experiments in an attempt to emulate their dreaded Raven god. The cultists also target other heretical groups worshipping the dark gods, stealing their relics and torturing their leaders for their own unholy knowledge. One of these one of the tasks of the cult, whispered to them by the demon Primarch through the Dark Conduit, is to help spread the children of the Raven across the galaxy. Female cultists will seduce the sons of known bloodlines before vanishing to rear the child into the cult, where it will be the focus of attention. Seen as a direct link to the cult's master, cultists will seduce... to the cult's masters. These damned souls are regarded with reverence and jealousy alike. Once grown, the children will travel to other worlds of the Imperium where the cult exists, where they are welcomed as dark messiahs. Interbreeding with cultists exposed to the Dark Conduit often causes changes in the strain, resulting in a new type of eldritch horror being created. The cult is ruthless in ensuring its existence remains secret, not hesitating to kill any family member who aren't members if they learn too much. Outwardly, the cultists' actions are difficult to distinguish from those of the more mundane criminals. Gruesome murders, abductions, theft, and so on. But when the time is right and the Legion Masters attack, they suddenly unleash everything at their disposal, revealing that they are far more dangerous than the authorities believed. This also happens when the cult has been cornered and is about to be purged, be it by the Arbiters, or Arbites, or the Inquisition. Witches, mutants, and demon hosts are set loose, and waves of madness spread across the planet, as any children of the cult might be keeping are driven into frenzy. The facade of control is swept away, revealing the true monsters all cultists become when partaking of the conduit's tainted knowledge. Driven mad by the revelation of the 19th Legion, they will never flee or surrender once pushed into the open, embracing death and the service of their foul god rather than risk facing his wrath. The greatest event involving the Raven Guard and servants since the heresy was the War of the Living World, which happened at the dawn of the 37th millennium, a few centuries after the end of the Age of Apostasy. Using the atrocities of Vandyre as a cover, an extensive cabal of children and cultists of the Raven had gathered in a single organization. Their purpose was to breed different lineages of the children of the Raven together, in order to create what they believed would be the perfect being. This was a massive undertaking, involving resources gathered and hoarded for several thousands of years. Children of the Raven were involved both as test subjects and as sponsors, using their position within the Imperium to seize resources and locations where the blasphemous experiments could be conducted. At first, the results were both wondrous and terrifying, with creatures of unprecedented psychic potential or physical might being created. The Raven Guard Legion itself took notice of the efforts of its mortal servants, and a handful of apothecaries traveled across the galaxy to join their skills to the endeavor. Eventually, the Cabal decided to gather all of its eugenic programs to a single location, a nearly forgotten planet in the Maxil Beta system. The planet had no name save for the meaningless combination of numbers and letters in the Imperial records, and even that was quietly erased by the Cabal's influence. The things created in the gene labs of this facility were incredible, and the Legion dared to believe that, at long last, the time had finally come to destroy the Imperium using the results of the work being performed there. But before their dreaded ambition could be completed, the psychic wave radiating from the very planet altered the Imperium. On Titan, the prognosticators of the Grey Knights sensed that the threat was growing in the Maxwell Beta, one that had already surpassed the ability of their order to deal without gathering the full strength of the chapter in a single location. Even as the fires of the Age of Apostasy were dying down, such a thing was impossible, and so the Grey Knights called for assistance. Such was the magnitude of the threat foreseen by the thing that the host assembled counted forces from several loyalist legions, as well as entire regiments of the Imperial Guard and thousands of the newly created Sisters of Battle. Together, this army was an example of strength of the resurgent Imperium and its slow diminishment under Vandir's rule. The Empire journeyed through the warp to Maxwell Beta was difficult, as the psychic echoes of the horrors bred by the cultists set the sea of souls in turmoil. Many ships were lost, and all suffered from the plague of nightmares and madness among the crew. Demonic incursions occurred every time a Gellerfield so much as flickered. The Imperial Guard transports suffered most of all, for they lacked the wards of the Grey Knight or the burning fate of the Sisters of Battle. In fact, the campaign would help solidify the place of the Adeptas Sororitas in the Imperium, despite the doubts of many, most famously the Word-bearers. When the fleet finally arrived, it did so piecemeal, so its various elements had been thrown away from one another by the currents of the warp. Fortunately, the heretics hiding in the system had relied on secrecy to protect them, until the great work was complete, and had little and no in the way of defenses. Only a handful of the 19th Legion ships and vessels stolen from the Imperial Navy patrolled it against intruders and lost travelers, ensuring no word of the facility got out. The Void Battle began dangerously for the Imperium, as scattered groups of the ships were attacked by the system's defenders. But as more ships arrived, the tide of battle was turned, and the Chaos ships fled to the edge of the system, leaving the path open to the actual planet. Individual labs were scattered across the surface of the planet, each breeding different manners of horrors within its walls. The Imperial commander's strategy was to destroy these factories of abominations one by one around the landing zone in an increasing circle until the entire planet was cleansed. As soon as the first troops touched ground, however, things took a turn for the worse. The cultists had time to prepare, and they let loose a host of nightmarish creations upon the Imperial forces. Thousands died within hours, but progress was still made, and several of the laboratories and flesh pits were purged with fire and blade. Then the leader of the cultists, a child of the Raven, who had once belonged to the highest Imperial nobility, made a decision that would have terrible consequences. This arch-heretic, known as Ambrosius, had been the one who had first started the Cabal centuries ago, his unique manifestation of his tainted bloodline keeping him alive for all that time without visible degeneration. As the Imperium pressed on, he deliberately sabotaged the containment of the worst creations of the breeding programs, allowing them to rampage freely, killing hundreds of heretics in minutes. The death toll made the warp boil, fueling yet further mutations among the creatures, which in turn increased the agitation of the warp, and so on and on in a vicious cycle. Eventually, the laboratory's creations devolved into one giant mass of still living flesh that spread across the entire planet, and at the center of it stood Ambrosius, the only one to have retained his own mind amidst the degeneration and madness. The children of the Raven had taken control of the world-sized cancer and was guiding it towards the Imperial forces. Meanwhile, the Raven Guard still present on the planet left, abandoning the efforts of their servants rather than risk being subsumed or consumed by their own unholy creation. Not even the bravest servants of the Emperor could expect to face such a nightmarish tide of flesh, and the Imperium was forced to abandon the planet after thousands of Imperial Guards and Sisters of Battle were claimed by the abominations crawling on its surface. Yet, the Grey Knight sensed that the psychic potential of the single organism was growing by the minute as his central mind, Ambrosius, assumed more and more control over it. Already the warp in Maxwell Beta was on the verge of breaking through the veil of reality. Should Ambrosius fully take control, he would become something very much akin to a god, something the Imperium had no hope to match. And so the Grey Knights launched a final desperate raid on the planet's surface, aiming to destroy the body of Ambrosius and annihilate his consciousness with a combined psychic assault. The Brotherhood of Grey Knights deployed for this was under psychic attack as soon as they teleported on the planet's surface. Ambrosius detected them immediately and sent hordes of shapeless horrors after all. For a moment, it seemed as if the mission was doomed to failure and the Imperium's future was grim. Then, out of nowhere, another warrior wearing the silver of the chapter came to the rescue of the beleaguered Brotherhood. None among the Grey Knights knew him, but such was the desperation of the situation that they accepted him in the group during the final rush towards Ambrosius's physical body. The confrontation of the arch-heretic's mutated form is considered one of the chapter's greatest battles. 6 warriors of the original Brotherhood, plus the unknown warrior, faced a creature several hundred meters in size, a bloated mass of flesh at the center of which rose the still recognizable form of a human male of noble bearing, glaring at the Grey Knights with hate-filled eyes. Yet despite the odds arrayed against them, the Grey Knights succeeded, as they ever do in such situations, though once again the cost was terrible. By combining their psychic powers together, the Brotherhood enabled the unknown champion to strike at the very heart of the monstrosity, destroying Ambrosius's mortal brain and casting his very soul into oblivion. With Ambrosius dead, the 2 surviving members of the Brotherhood teleported back to their ship, but the mysterious warrior was left behind, his armor refusing to accept the teleportation codes. As soon as the Grey Knights had arrived, the entire fleet opened fire upon the writing world, unleashing the full wrath of Exterminatus on the abomination. But as the first shells hit, the warp flared with enough power that had the fleet not already raised the Geller fields, it would have been lost instantly to the madness of the Sea of Souls. Even with the fields raised, every psychic soul among the Armada heard the same cry, as the living world proclaimed its existence to the galaxy, sending waves of insanity and heresy across the stars. Something was horribly wrong here. It wasn't the twisting tentacles that rose from the ground, nor the fanged mouths that opened on the very surface to scream their agony and madness. It wasn't the million eyes staring at him from all directions, nor the half-formed things that clawed their way out of flesh, only to die within seconds of claiming their freedom. It took a moment for the Silver Warrior to realize what exactly it was that gnawed at his subconscious, until he saw it. The date on his helmet display. It had synchronized with the system of the Brotherhood he had met, its chromes rendered useless during his journey through the warp. The date was 2,000 years before he, Kaldor Drago, had become a Grey Knight. His mind reeled at the realization, even as he continued to fight his way across the twisted flesh surrounding him. For to stop, even for a second, would be a death sentence. Pieces fell together, the looks the ancients of the chapter had given him as he rose through the ranks, the laughter and mocking insults of some of the demons he had fought. From the very beginning, his chapter had known that his fate would bring him here, on this infernal living world. It was duty that held him together, duty that made him go even after learning that his doom had been foretold and written in stone long before he had ever been born. None of it mattered. All that mattered was that the Emperor's foe be struck down. If he was to be trapped on this world for the rest of eternity, then so be it. He would fight all the way to the end of time itself if necessary, for that was what the Emperor demanded of him. And then the planet spoke, with 100 different voices, booming and echoing in his mind, all saying the same 3 words over and over. We are Malice. When the screams faded and the planet was gone, swallowed into the warp, it took many years to suppress the full effects of the living world's birth cry. For every system, 100 light years radius had been subjected to its mutating madness. Brotherhoods of Grey Knights fought alongside warriors and seers of the Thousand Suns, while an imperial effort on the scale of the Crusade was deployed, but never recorded in official archives. The War of the Living World is known only to the Grey Knights, the Inquisition, and those loyal legion who took part in it. As this war was being waged, a new shattering revelation was uncovered by the Grey Knights. The unknown warrior that had saved the last desperate raid upon the laboratory planet was indeed of their chapter, but he was one that would not even be born for another 2 millennia. Kaldor Drago. In a display of the warp's disregard for casualty and linear time, this Grey Knight would be inducted into the ranks of the chapter, rise to the ranks, and then vanish into the Sea of Soul during the 31st millennium, only to be cast back through time and emerge just in time to help the Brotherhood fighting against the Raven spawn. Ever since then, Khal Drogo's fate had been bound to the living world. For the living world, also known as Malice, as its many fractured minds call themselves, has since become a recurrent threat to the Imperium. This sentient demon world emerges from the Imperium at unpredictable intervals across the galaxy, bringing madness and mutation upon the worlds that fall under its baleful glare. When this happens, Drago also appears on unafflicted worlds, fighting against the minions of the planet with all the strength and devotion expected of a Grey Knight, before being dragged back onto Malice's surface when the planet returns to the warp. There he continues the fight, on and on, according to the legends of the secretive chapter, forever. Even while hidden away in the warp, Malice sends visions across the galaxy, twisting the minds of the unfortunate who receive them and transforming them into the base cultists who work obsessively to bring the stars in alignment and call for their horrifying god from the depths of the Sea of Souls. These mortal agents, who call themselves the sons and daughters of Malice, are known for their unholy ability to shape their own flesh in a fluid manner, turning from normal-looking humans to horrific monsters in mere seconds. The exact meaning of alignment is unclear, but the cultists attempt to spread their terrible gifts to as many others as possible, designing dreaded plagues of mutations that seem to draw the planet closer, as if called for. The Sons of Malice are also sworn enemies of the Cult of the Raven and the 19th Legion in general, as Malice feels nothing but hatred for those responsible in its creation. This had led Corax to forbid his cultists from ever attempting to breed the children's bloodlines together, lest another such threat to his own design be created. The power of the living world has drawn a handful of sorcerers, not all belonging to the Raven Guard, and not all of any human strand, to seek a way to bind the planet to their own will. They believe that there is a pattern to Malice's manifestations, as evidenced by the activities of the planet's cultists, and that uncovering it is the key to the dark ambition. Even a group of inquisitors has fallen victim to the empty promises of the living world's power. Scattered across the galaxy, this cabal of radicals believe that Malice can be turned into a weapon of incredible power in the internal war against the arch-enemy. But, like all such attempts, this is doomed to fall, as all inquisitors succumb to the insanity of the living world, whose countless minds are ever fighting against one another for supremacy. While the abomination of Malice is the Raven Guard's most terrible creation that we know of, it is far from being the only ancient evil born of their unholy practices. The deepest vault of the Inquisition contains stories of the Crusade of Monsters, the Horror of Opis, the Ghoul King of Hanendra II, and the countless others. Yet during all this time, not once has Corax himself left his lair in the Eye of Terror. According to captured prisoners, the Demon Primarch is still torturing the Lords of Clavar, endlessly killing and bringing them back from the dead by fell sorcery. But even the most skilled of his apothecaries and sorcerers eventually fall to return the wretched creatures to life, and their numbers has been dwindling over the course of millennia. This dread countdown to zero worries the Inquisition, who does not know what the Raven Lord will do after the last of his old tormentors are finally freed from his torment.